This war has been a strategic failure for Putin. He wanted to make Ukraine Russian, it became European. He wanted to stop NATO from enlarging, he got Finland and Sweden. And he wanted to keep European defense expenditure down, we're going up to 5%. And as I keep on saying that Ukraine has the cards right now as we move into the 5th year of this war. The first thing President Xi Jinping said, Mr. President, you have said that I could end this war with one phone call. I said, it's a bit more complicated than that. And then we laughed.
Hello, welcome to a special edition of On the Record from the Presidential Palace in Helsinki. Our guest is President Alexander Stubb, who invited us to his palace for a conversation about what is happening in Europe and the world. President Stubb, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you, the 5th year of war in Ukraine is approaching. We see some diplomacy going on. What is your personal assessment of what the chances of an agreement are, a ceasefire, a peace deal, or continued struggle?
Well, we work with 3 scenarios. The first one is that the war continues, and actually Ukraine is doing much better than Russia right now. The second one is that we get a peace deal. And the third one is that one side or the other starts to collapse, Ukraine or Russia. Right now, though I know that there are only a few remaining questions open with the peace agreement, mainly territory and the Zaporizhzhia power plant, I'm still quite skeptical that the Russians will approve this. So in that sense, our base case is that the war will continue into the summer.
So who is the biggest obstacle to peace?
Oh, Putin and Russia. Yeah.
But the US administration, with whom you very often speak, and it seems you speak with them on good terms and they listen to your advice, they seem to believe that it's Ukraine and Zelenskyy personally who is responsible for the delay, for being obstinate.
No, I disagree. And of course, then when you speak with the US administration and the actual negotiators, like Jared Kushner or Steve Witkoff, I think the tone is quite different. So there's always a part of public diplomacy and then private diplomacy. I think things started to go in a better direction when Jared Kushner joined the negotiating team about 4 months ago. That's when he basically opened his laptop and started to work on concrete agreements. And we're working on 3 concrete agreements right now. One is the 20-point plan. Second one is the security guarantees. And the third one is the reconstruction plan. And I think we're very much on the same page, Europe, Ukraine, and the United States. But I'm afraid that Putin will not accept this. But, that's something that we're trying to work on.
Right. So dealing with the first issue first, if you're saying Europe, Ukraine, and the United States are now on the same page, what are the crucial elements of this joint plan?
Well, I think apart from the 20-point plan, where the most crucial question is territory, so basically Donetsk, the 20%, and the Zaporizhzhia power plant. That's, the most difficult issue. But where we are 100% on the same page is the security guarantees, where the Americans are providing a backstop. And then also the reconstruction plan, where Europe and the United States have worked on a major package on how to get Ukraine going again. So I'm much more optimistic about where we are now than where we were about 4 or 5 months ago.
Could you explain to us, could you help to understand why the territorial issue is so important, given that Russia is demanding territories it doesn't even control now?
Yeah, it's crazy.
But by implication, the Western world should be on the same page as Ukraine, saying ceasefire can be possible where armies stand rather than extra claims.
Definitely.
So my question is, why doesn't the Trump administration see it that way?
Well, I think we're working on it from all different perspectives, and it is especially the Trump administration and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff that are doing it, together with people like Umerov from the Ukrainian side. And I think there are 2 options. Option number 1 is that Ukraine would give up Donetsk and make it into some kind of a free economic trade zone and a demilitarized zone, somehow guarded by Russia. I think the idea is crazy. The second option is that we stop the war at the line of contact and create a demilitarized zone 20 kilometers to the east and 20 kilometers to the west. Why do I say I think it's crazy? Well, it's crazy because Russia is not advancing. They're basically losing this war on the battlefield. In the past 2 years, they have advanced 1% of territory. They are advancing now at a cost of 157 dead to a square kilometer. And we're also in a situation where Russia is losing 65,000 soldiers in 2 months.
Can I ask, therefore, perhaps a slightly silly question? Why then the rush into some kind of peace deal if Russia is losing?
Well, because we need to negotiate a peace agreement and stop this war. I think President Trump is correct on that. But now I think most of the cards are actually with Ukraine. Look, this war has been a strategic failure for Putin. He wanted to make Ukraine Russian, it became European. He wanted to stop NATO from enlarging. He got Finland and Sweden. And he wanted to keep European defense expenditure down. We're going up to 5%. Militarily, he's losing on the battlefront. He's not advancing. And when he advances, Ukraine advances somewhere else. So this has been a military disaster for Russia. And thirdly, his economy is doing badly. In other words, he's out of reserves, zero growth, 16% interest rates, double-digit inflation. So I think we can continue to push the Russians and keep the pressure up.
A couple of months ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said something publicly that perhaps we need to get ready for Ukraine to have to accept an unjust peace. Have the circumstances changed since then that perhaps it's no longer necessary? Maybe Ukraine can still pursue a just peace.
Well, it's not black and white. You know, peace can be just, unjust, good, bad, or a compromise. Usually it's a compromise. So in an ideal situation, of course, you know, Ukraine would keep its territory, Russia would have to pay war compensation, Russian war criminals would be indicted. But I don't see that as being realistic for the time being. So then the question is, how can we maximize the benefits of this peace to Ukraine? And I think at the end of the day, they will actually do quite well from this peace. I'll just give you one example on territory, which is the most difficult one. A country like Finland will never de jure accept Russian annexation of Ukrainian territory. So if there is a ceasefire at the line of contact, then that will probably become a truce. And then an international issue that we'll be dealing with for a long time.
Do you get a sense that the US administration is exerting more pressure on Ukraine than on Russia to actually settle? And, you know, a classic example to me is this constant nagging about elections in Ukraine, which sounds strange given that, you know, Russia doesn't get any type of this demand, like releasing prisoners, you know, political prisoners, easing censorship and all of that. This is like, nobody cares about this. But in Ukraine's case, suddenly these mythical elections are so important for the Americans. How do you explain that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the Americans see themselves as mediators in this. I think that's a starting point. Secondly, I actually think that Zelenskyy is very open to elections. He's not afraid of elections, quite the contrary. And I think, was it in Munich, he put it quite well, that he's also happy for Russia to provide elections themselves, and then he can be an observer if so need be. So, you know, there's a bit of back and forth with this.
He's sort of trying to ridicule the idea, but the US pressure on these elections is real.
But I don't think Zelenskyy has a problem with that. He wants to organize elections.
But is it possible to organize elections when your country is, you know, at war with millions of people at the front lines, refugees abroad?
I think Zelenskyy has said over the past months, and I know that the Financial Times ran a story, and I thought, well, what's the news here? He has said for months that, you know, when there is a peace deal, he's willing to put that peace deal into a referendum and organize elections.
From your dealings with the US officials, do they understand that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all understand that. And that's why I'm saying that, you know, Ukraine has all the cards here.
So some of this stuff is just noise for the...
I think sometimes public diplomacy is quite different from private diplomacy. And as I keep on saying, that Ukraine has the cards right now as we move into the 5th year of this war on the battlefield, in terms of general strategy, in terms of concessions. So, I'm quite hopeful from the perspective of Ukraine.
Right. Another conception or misconception in the public domain is that some of these negotiators on both sides, on Russia's side and on the American side, perhaps not so much in Ukraine, they're business people. Mm-hmm. And some of them seem to be very keen to return to some form of business with Russia, be it on natural resources, oil and gas, lots of other issues. And that perhaps this is the reason that they're pushing Ukraine so hard to accept this deal. Have you encountered this?
Well, I think, we have to be realistic. I always say, deal with the world as it is. Don't deal with it as you would wish it to be. And if you look at the 3 key pillars of foreign policy, values, interests, and power, the United States has changed. In terms of values, it is, of course, very much strongly advocating MAGA, Make America Great Again, and America First policy, which is, for instance, anti-EU, anti-liberal institutions, and anti-climate change. That's the strand that they have. So they have moved to the right on values. On interests, yes, it is much more based on financial interests. That's why there's stuff on tariffs. That's why there are trade deals. That's why there are icebreaker deals. That's why there's
with
talk
Finland.
With Finland. That's why there's deals linked to minerals in Ukraine, or deals linked to reconstruction in Gaza. They're all business deals in many ways. So therefore, make an assumption that there's probably going to be something after the war is over with Russia as well. And then thirdly, on power, they have shifted in the sense that they don't consult allies as closely as they used to. But this is a reality that we have to live with. Now, then of course, how much do you trust the Russian business deal? If the Russians say that you'll have access to 12 trillion, and then you sort of see, the Russian GDP is 2.5 trillion. Where does this 12 trillion come from? So I think whoever is doing deals, if deals are being done, they have to be very careful because I think the Russians are lying.
So in a sense, maybe this is just a carrot that the US administration is waving in front of some people in the Kremlin to say it's time to finish this war.
Could be. We don't know.
We don't know that. You also mentioned to us, I think about a year ago, that this war could end if China made one phone call. Do you remember that?
I do. That was to Bloomberg, I think.
No, you said that to us as well. So probably this was your consistent line back then.
Yes.
So first of all, has this phone call happened? And are you still hopeful that it would happen?
Well, an interesting anecdote. I was on a state visit to China, to Beijing, and I spent the better part of 3 hours with President Xi Jinping. And this was in November 2024, so it's almost a year and a half ago. And that's when I had said that. And the first thing President Xi Jinping said, Mr. President, you have said that I could end this war with one phone call. I said, it's a bit more complicated than that. And then we laughed. So, of course, China is engaged in various forms of diplomacy. Of course, I would hope for China to be tougher on Russia, but the line that they have chosen is to be more with Russia than against Russia. So when I say that for Finland, the fact that you're able to enable Russia to fight this war is a security threat on us, they say, we're not providing them with any weapons. And then I say, how about dual-use goods? He says, no, we don't do that. So I do think that President Xi Jinping still has a lot of power over Russia, and he could be very helpful in this. Whether he'll do it or not, we don't know. We'll see what happens when President Trump visits Xi Jinping in Beijing in April.
And what is your overall attitude to Europe's re-engagement with China, particularly after Greenland? It seemed that China managed to present itself as, look, we are a more responsible partner for Europe. And we saw, starting from Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, and then several other Prime Ministers of major European powers, suddenly going to Beijing, discussing deals, and saying, if America is no longer a reliable ally, maybe we have no choice, and align ourselves with China. To me, it seems like it's moving between two walls. So I was just curious to hear what your opinion is.
I'm pro-European, pro-American, and therefore by definition a pro-transatlanticist. So I think the closest and strongest bond, whether it's security, military, economy, trade, or technology, is between Europe and the United States. So of course I would prefer that relationship to be very stable and solid. But right now it's shifting. Let's be honest about it. That's how it is. And now what's going to happen is that people around the world, including Europe, will also be looking to hedge their bets elsewhere. Therefore, we do a trade agreement with Mercosur. Therefore, we do a trade agreement with India. And therefore, we'll probably at some stage open negotiations on an investment agreement with China. Not free trade yet. And you're going to start seeing that a lot. And that's something that we talk about with our American friends as well, that realize if you're throwing tariffs at us and China is bringing tariffs down, then, which do you deal with? So I do think that there's going to be a little shift. But to be honest, the world is much more complicated. So we're going to be completely intertwined with China, the United States, and Europe for a long time to come.
So in other words, you're saying the globalization cannot be undone so easily?
Certainly not. Look, I'll just give you examples. So what is the technological network in the United States? It's Nokia and Ericsson, Finnish company and a Swedish company. What is our defense cooperation with the United States? We just bought 64 F-35s and we sold 11 icebreakers, completely intertwined. When it comes to minerals, we're linked to each other. When it comes to trade, we're linked to each other. When it comes to chips, when it comes to quantum, we're linked to each other. So you can't separate these relations just like that.
And with China, it's a different story because China doesn't want to import anything from Europe apart from luxury goods. I'm not sure Finland is huge in the luxury goods market, but probably you have few items. But no, seriously, China basically says we don't need anything from you. We just want to sell our stuff to you, which is unsustainable.
We, of course, have a lot of trade with China. I mean, not a luxury good,
but it's a one-sided trade.
Oh, no. I mean, look, what's the biggest elevator maker in the world?
Kone.
Which country needs a lot of elevators? China.
Okay. Are you sure the Chinese are not producing their Kone by now?
No, but there are a lot of Kone plants in China, one of which I have opened. So all I'm saying is that, we sort of try to live in this binary black and white world that, globalization is dead, value chains are dead. And I think that's a load of rubbish. I mean, of course, people are hedging their bets. We're de-risking a little bit from the US, we're de-risking from China, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the world is so interdependent that we cannot detach ourselves just by pulling a plug.
So how is it with your famous role as a Trump whisperer? Is this something that the media have invented, or can you actually point to some successes where you managed to maybe change President Trump's view on certain things, particularly when it comes to Europe, Ukraine, security here?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't want to inflate my role as what has been quote unquote called a Trump whisperer. I am the president of Finland. The president of Poland, Nawrocki, has a good relationship with Trump as well. And I think it's very important for a head of state or government to have relations around the world. Now, I happen to have played a round of golf with President Trump early on in his presidency, and we have had the chance to have a number of conversations and phone calls. I'm very grateful for that, but I have no illusions about my impact. So I quite often say that if I throw out 10 ideas there, he might pick up on one. Do I have any examples of success? Well, the United States needed icebreakers, and originally they only wanted a few of them, but because of our good relationship with President Trump, he said he wants 11 and we made a deal. So, it's good to have that contact, but I have no illusions about being a Trump whisperer.
So finally, do you see, Greenland was probably the high point of tensions between the Europeans, Nordic countries, and the United States. President Trump seemed to have walked back. There are some negotiations. Things are returning to more calm discussion. Do you think in the next couple of months, before the November midterm elections in the United States, Are we going to witness more normalization in the transatlantic relationship, or do you expect still bumps in the road, so to speak?
Well, I think you have to be realistic. President Trump's foreign policy is very active. And because it's active, there will probably be bumps in the road. But what kind of bumps, we don't know. I think on Greenland, we were able to de-escalate. We had 3 scenarios, good, bad, and ugly. The good was that we find a process and way out. Bad was an increase of tariff, and the worst and ugly was a continued military threat. We got rid of 3 and 2, and now we're focusing on 2 processes with Greenland. One is a negotiation on the agreement from 1951 between Denmark, Greenland, and the United States, and the other one is a strengthening of Arctic security, which of course I, as a Finn with one of the largest Arctic militaries in the alliance, am very happy about. But of course there are going to be disagreements, but we just have to deal with them like adults and stay cool, calm and collected, enjoy the winter, take a sauna and an ice bath and cool things down.
So compared to the beginning of this presidency, so the beginning of Mr. Trump's term, do you see this relationship with Europe normalizing, becoming more pragmatic, or are we still at the phase of sort of high tension ideological divides?
There is always going to be the ideological MAGA strand of things, so that's why you'll see President Trump supporting someone like Viktor Orban, for instance. But then there'll be the practical thing, which is about increasing NATO expenditure to 5%, about Arctic security, about icebreakers, about different forms of cooperation. So I think in that sense, things will stabilize. We now understand what the American administration wants, and that has been defined in the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy. And it has 2 pillars. One is MAGA, which is anti-EU, I admit that, but that's ideological. And then one is America First. And in America First, there's a pecking order, which is number 1, Western Hemisphere. That's very much Rubio. Number 2, Indo-Pacific, that's very much Colby. Number 3, Europe. Number 4, Middle East. And number 5, Africa. And this is the reality that we live with. But it's in America's interest to be closely involved with its best ally, in other words, Europe.
So are you more optimistic about Europe's future today than you were, let's say, 9 months ago?
I am quite optimistic about Europe's future because we're taking more responsibility of our own security. We're doing more geopolitics ourselves, and we're managing our relationship with the United States in a pragmatic, non-ideological way.
Mr. President, thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you for watching On the Record, this time from Helsinki, and see you next week from Warsaw.